I hope an hour is going to be enough time to talk about recycling because it really is a huge subject. To begin, I want to give you guys just first, I'm going to ask Miles to give us a brief background exposition of what is the current state of recycling in the UK. And if you can also elaborate by comparing it to other jurisdictions or countries if you wish.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joanne. Thank you for inviting us here today. So in the UK, we do have a bit of a problem, is that if you look at typical household or look at the amount of waste we produce, only about 44% of that is actually recycled. Most of it is put into landfill, and we've just had some fantastic discussions here about soil quality, yet we're putting rubbish into the land in which we are, which we've just been talking about, or it's incinerated, or it's sent overseas for something else. So the vast majority of the waste is it isn't recycled, and of course it's been getting a bit worse as well, particularly since 2016. Was it quite a topical year? But it's been actually getting a bit worse as well. And if I look at ourselves in paper and packaging, here we used to recycle about over 80% of the paper and board in the UK, but now it's down to it's about 74%. We're in the bottom quartile of Europe, and all of that waste is meaning more carbon's used, more's going to landfill, more's going to incinerate, more resources are used, and we just think it's a completely unsustainable way of working, particularly as we're getting worse. That's our biggest problem.
Now, you're fortunate because you're in the business of paper recycling, which enjoys a much higher rate of recycling. In the UK, 74% of paper and card are recycled. By the way, business has a much higher recycling rate than consumers. Unfortunately, plastic, which is obviously considered the blackguard category of recycling, has a much lower recycling rate. And on that, I'd like to ask either Adam or Torik to elaborate on what is the rate of plastic recycling? Why is it significantly lower? Either of you, please feel free.
I'll go ahead. So plastic, obviously there's been a bit of a proliferation of plastics and how we use plastic over the last sort of 50 years or so, particularly over the last maybe 20 years. The problem we have with plastic recycling over things like paper, obviously we've been recycling paper for a lot longer anyway, so things are a bit more mature, markets more mature, people know how to do it. Whereas plastic, you might think, oh, there's maybe 7 types of plastic. There's not. There's more types of plastic than you would ever believe or understand. Not all of them are recyclable. Some are very recyclable, some are very circular. But obviously when we're talking about, so Miles talked about sort of how we do things across the UK. We do things in a very, very inconsistent way. So where I live in Surrey, we put everything in one bin. I can recycle pretty much all types of packaging that's placed on the shelves-ish, give or take, broadly speaking. Whereas Manchester, where Torik works, they don't recycle quite a lot of the plastics. They don't collect, say, pots, tubs, and trays. They don't allow you to recycle the bottle tops on top of your water bottles or your Coke bottles, for example. So it does vary widely across wherever you might live, which means there's lots of confusion from a citizen point of view, not quite sure what to do. There's lots of confusion from a political and policy point of view as well, so therefore local authorities don't know necessarily what they want to do because they don't know where they need to invest. Businesses don't need to know where to invest necessarily because they don't know where the material is going to come from. I think that's probably the best I'm going to do for a moment before.
Torik is something to ask, and also Torik, I'm going to ask you also, describe to the consumer the categories of plastic which are problematic and where there is not even the infrastructure or the technology to recycle them. Because a lot of the goals of EA Sustain is always to disseminate information useful to the consumer and citizen.
Yeah, so I wanted to make a point just before I think about that, which is the significance of history, I think, to all of this. If you look at other sort of systems, energy systems, if you look at a water system, there was a period there in the UK where we say with the electricity system, where we had a nationalisation. What you have there is a programme of buying up smaller district networks, knitting them into a national network. We've never ever done that with waste and the way that we handle waste. It's not that long ago that the bin was just called a dust bin because it pretty much just had dust in it or other remnants, probably some sort of stuff. We now have a huge amount of different types of materials in circulation, and echoing what Adam was saying there. When we talk about plastic as if it's a thing. I think plastics, a lot of the time, wrongfully gets seen as the sort of the devil of all of the waste in some ways. And the reason I say this, actually, some plastics aren't necessarily as bad as we think. There's plastic bottles can be and are pretty well recycled a lot of the time. They're a lot lighter, less carbon footprint, less energy in terms of processing. Then there's a whole load of other stuff which still proves really difficult at the moment, like your flexible plastics and stuff like that.
Most people don't even know what that means.
So your bread bags, or to even
Crisp bags.
Yeah, to complicate the mix, metallized laminates, which are crisp packets, which will be a combination of materials, both plastic, both metals, layered up together, which makes them really difficult to pull apart, to recycle, and all that stuff. But yeah, I just wanted to raise a point when we talk about the history of this stuff. I actually don't think it's been that long that we've been talking about the importance of recycling of waste, because actually, even in my lifetime, I think of a dustbin, and all of a sudden, then we've gone through to having a general waste bin, a food caddy, a dry recycling, possibly separation for paper and stuff like that. The question that you asked, I've rambled on a little bit there. I apologise.
No, you made a crucial point about the history. But go on. Yes.
The question you asked about what would I say to consumers?
Well, I mean, I think there are certain categories. I mean, we're trying to explain here why the plastic recycling rate is lower significantly. One of the answers was a number of types of plastic in use as packaging, but also it's a lack of infrastructure available to recycle it in the UK. And for what types of plastic packaging are we talking about? Because that's something that the consumer would want to know.
I mean, I don't know if you guys would agree with me on this. Look, if as a consumer, know where you are for a start, so know what the rules are in place in the particular area, and unfortunately don't always take for granted what's on packaging is actually what you can recycle. I get really annoyed when I see packaging that says widely recycled. A huge amount of that stuff is not. If you live in Manchester, pots, tubs and trays are not collected for recycling. They don't want them. It contaminates the recycling. So know where you are is a really, really important thing. The second thing, in terms of like knowing your infrastructure and stuff like that, we also need to be really careful when we say like the UK, because we don't have a coherent system across the UK.
Good point.
If you want to actually know where it's done relatively well, look at Wales.
Okay. Now, Miles, actually, why don't you, by the way, I decided to instigate this discussion because of a conversation I had with Miles very casually, just as a friend, where he alerted me to the fact of the number of recycling regimes in the various municipalities all over the UK, plus the fact that DS Smith was actually had contracts with so many, over 100 municipalities, even more. They were actually doing the job that I thought was a public good. And this completely flipped me out, and I scratched beneath the surface. On this note, I want to ask you, Miles, to also just tell us about how many recycling regimes there are. I mean, Adam and Torik have alluded to it, but do you have some figures? And I mean, do they?
Absolutely. I mean, the thing is, we all recognise we have a problem with the amount of waste we are producing, and we have to make it simple. And I think part of the issue is the complexity. You talked about a water bottle. You're right, the actual bottle itself, of course, the cap, well, that's different. The cap's different from that, and actually the label's different again. So it's very difficult for the consumer to understand. Obviously, I work in a business, and we only make fibre-based products. And when we pick up the board, we pick up the newspaper, we make that into new board, new paper to make a box, and we pick it up again. It goes round and round and round again. And on average, we reuse the fibre about 12 times. And if the fibre's from a newspaper or from it doesn't matter to us. Fibre, in most senses, is fibre. You get hard and soft with it, but it's really fibre. It's quite simple. So we do in the UK, we contract with local authorities, and there are 200 different systems of collection of household waste in the UK. 200, okay? Some of them, where we live now, it's not far from here in North Essex. You put everything in a bag. Where we were before in East Harts, it wasn't. It was different. Whereas, of course, we just heard about the complexity and about how we want to make it easier to recycle by having a much more consistent way of recycling. So 200 systems, all different. When we go and talk to our big industrial customers, so big producer of waste, the companies like say Tesco, and we collect all of Tesco's refuse from right across the UK, every store. It is completely consistent at every single store. So their recycling rate, instead of being 44%, is 98%. And it's all reused. And it's because it's a single way of collecting the refuse and makes it easy for us. We actually pay for the refuse. It's actually worth a lot of money. And the higher the quality, the more we pay for it. And they would say, and that helps reduce prices to the consumer. So you've got 200 systems in the UK. The UK is quite a small country, really. Whereas when we go to some other countries, Netherlands, Bulgaria, Germany, you find that it's actually much more consistent. 1, 2 or 3, depending on if it's a federal state, etc. And of course, therefore, their recycling rates are much higher. So it seems that's the complexity which you're having to deal with in the UK. Maybe it's because we didn't have a nationalised business, but of course, Tesco have never been nationalised.
Yeah, but if we think about what Tesco are, they're a big single commercial entity. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're an institution. Mm-hmm. They could employ and manage recycling on site and everything. What we have in the UK is every household is an appendage to a MRF. How many households are there?
Tell them what a MRF is.
A MRF is a materials recovery facility. So when you send your recycling off, it'll go and get sorted, and it'll be put into different streams, ideally, depending on what they're processing at that site. But we're integrally a part of that system. Every household is part of it and affects the quality of the waste that's produced. And that's one of the reasons, I think, one of the biggest challenges is, and I appreciate the question about, what do consumers need to know. I actually think that we've spent too much time thinking about the responsibility of the consumer a lot of the time. I don't think we're necessarily in the best position to make to make the shift that's required. And I think the stagnated rates of recycling that we've had in England in particular speak to that a little bit. I'm not saying that consumers aren't part of the puzzle, but I think we've got to a point where we really do need to start thinking about how do we implement consistency in a through policy and practically as well through a synthesis of infrastructure.
Okay, there's so much to talk about. So, okay, first, let's talk about consistency. This is actually the easiest subject to tackle first.
Well, maybe.
I know, it's like doing his head in, even that I even said that sentence. But, okay, at every phase, there needs to be more consistency. So, Adam, why don't you walk us through that? From the design, and then tell us about the Plastic Packaging Pact, and then all the way through the supply chain, through the consumer, then to the waste disposal. Yeah.
So consistency is going to be really key from a number of different aspects, be it, say, through design, even be through the language you're using, how you talk to consumers, talk to manufacturers, recyclers, and producers and things as well. So from a design perspective, if you want to talk about, say, from plastics, I'll go from that angle, and I'm also talk about paper maybe. We want everything to be, where possible, a single polymer. So, like we mentioned, how, say, a crisp packet might be a sort of a PP bag, but then it's got a vacuum deposition metallized layer on there. That's two types of materials. It might be that if anyone here has got any pets or children, you've got pet food pouches or kids pouches. There will be sort of different. There might be a PP layer in there, so polypropylene, a PET layer, a foil laminate, which is different to a foil metallized vacuum deposition. Plus a different polymer on the lid. So you want everything to be as simple as possible, because you can't separate materials out that well, especially when they're glued on or laminated on, for example. So in the UK Plastics Pact, which we run at WRAP, we work very much with the brands, retailers, manufacturers. So what can we do to try and simplify this packaging to make sure that it still has the right sort of shelf life, especially for food contact materials, because food, believe it or not, or many of you in the room probably know anyway, food has a much bigger impact on food waste than any packaging does, regardless of the material. If food waste was a country, it will be the third largest emitter of carbon globally. So it's a big, big problem, which is another thing we work on at WRAP, but maybe that's a conversation for another time. Then you've got the consistency in terms of messaging to consumers. So many of you might see on, say, Vivino's got a water bottle and they've got like a green sort of box with a white sort of Recycle Now swoosh, we call it, because Recycle Now is a communications campaign that we use. And it will say on there, recycle or don't recycle. Try and simplify that message, because as a consumer, you don't know the difference, well, I assume you probably won't know the difference between different types of polymers, what they look, what they feel. It could be very confusing. So try and simplify it as much as possible. But you have to have that standardized, consistent approach, no matter where you are, so it's all easy to understand. And that includes as well how you talk about it, not just on pack, but wider. So just quick show of hands, who takes their films and flexibles to the local supermarket for recycling? Cool. You might notice that if you go to Tesco, it'll be called soft plastics. If you go to Morrison's, it's called plastic bags and wrapping. If you go to Sainsbury's, it might be called flexibles or scrunchy. They all mean different things to different people. So we've done lots of work at WRAP to understand what's the best way to use an umbrella approach to talk about this, what do most people understand. So we tested those terminologies that are out already used. And we sort of went around asking people what they call it as well. And then we did some big national surveys to understand how it works. Who goes to Tesco? I shouldn't use names of places.
We only take it if it says recycle at your store. I don't
Correct.
actually put it in my bread bag unless it says that.
Yeah, great, fine. But Tesco used the terminology soft plastics. So actually, if you ask people, we test it nationally, tests really poorly. People don't know what soft plastics are, what they mean. So when I was talking about this at a party with some friends, because I'm that much of a weirdo nerd who likes to talk about plastics to their friends on social occasions, and we talked about soft plastics, he was like, great, that means I can take my expanded polystyrene there, because it's soft and it's squeezy. Expanded polystyrene, the stuff you get at TVs and things. That is not recyclable, and that with that, it's not at all. But they're like, oh, it's soft. Doesn't mean anything. So and actually the terminology that works best is plastic bags and wrapping, because it describes what it is. I won't go into more detail about that, but it shows the need for that consistent approach, because it confuses people. And then consistency in terms of collections. Obviously mentioned 200 different collection regimes across the world, across the country, sorry, way more across the world. That's so confusing. Where I live, I put all my recycling in one bin. If I go to a local authority next to me, they have it slightly differently. The local authority next to that, they have everything in one bin, but the bins are exactly the same as each other. So they've got a black bin for residual, a black bin for recycling, a black bin for garden waste. It's bizarre. So it's really is get confusing. It's why we need the consistency across that piece. So if you move or you visit friends, family, you just recycle in the same way. And then obviously that then helps in terms of infrastructure about what you need to develop. Because if I'm collecting something in the southeast, and it's different to what's collected in the northwest, that's a different type of infrastructure you need for the collection, for sortation, because you're sorting different materials, for recycling those materials, because you try, where possible, to build facilities where the feedstock is to minimise transport. So it needs that consistency across the whole piece to enable it to work effectively, and that's where things like Wales have done it really, really well.
Okay, on the bright side, because I want to make sure that's covered. I mean, WRAP is working with the private sector organizations, namely corporations, representing 80% of plastic packaging. And they have this was actually a really bright spot in the research to this session, to learn that, in fact, a lot of convergence of packaging, you have been able to engineer that through WRAP's activity, working with this consortium of business. So where are you guys on the progress towards the ultimate goal of the plastic packaging?
Yeah, so for those who don't know who the UK Plastics Pact is, it was the first sort of collaboration, voluntary agreement in the world. We now have developed that into things that are now global. So we've got a plastics pact on every populated continent in the world. Obviously just not the Arctic, because that's not a populated continent, or a continent. So what it is, we've got 4 targets, and it started in 2018, it lasts till 2025. So target 1 is the elimination of all unnecessary and problematic plastic packaging. Target 2 was for all plastic packaging to be recyclable, reusable, or compostable. Target 3 is to have an effective recycling rate of plastic packaging of 70%. And then target 4 is an average recycled content of 30% across all plastic packaging. Obviously, so we've got another 18 months left of this. Obviously, it started in 2018. And the world has changed since 2018. Lots of things have happened. We've had a global pandemic, which no one would have thought would happen. When the global pandemic first started, we thought maybe it's going to be 3 months, 6 months. It was 2 years. We're still feeling the effects of it, aren't we? There's been lots of change, cost of living. Politically, it's been an interesting couple of years, shall we say, for the industry. Lots of different secretaries of state, lots of prime ministers. So in terms of progress, Target 1, we're doing really, really well. We've actually, our members, so it makes up about 80% of the plastic supply chain. Our members have eliminated 99.6% of the plastics packaging that's been identified as problematic and unnecessary. And we do update that list as well as things progress. So we think things like you used to be able to get like cotton buds on plastic sticks. Don't get that anymore. Coffee stirrers made out of plastic. Don't get that anymore. Balloon sticks. Don't get that anymore, amongst others. And obviously, alongside these things we've been doing, we've now had government bans in place, single-use plastic bans, so the most recent iteration coming October last year. So we're on target to hit Target 1 by 2025. Brilliant. I'll be quick, so I know.
Okay. No. Okay. Single-use plastic has been banned.
Target 4, so the 30% recycled content target, we're on target for that. We were in 2018.
Tell the audience what that actually means, because
So-
you went through that.
Yes,
and
so-
also the latest legislation, so they can understand the progress that has been made in mandating the use of recycled material in new packaging.
So in 2018, obviously, we launched target of 30% average across all plastic. And that we say an average across all because you can get really high recycled content levels in things like milk bottles, water bottles, that sort of stuff. But it's nigh on impossible to get recycled content in films and flexibles for various reasons, from performance to legislation and being food contact. So we say average. There is a government tax on recycled content that came in 2022, March 2022, which was originally £200 a tonne on any plastic that's under 30%, which is now, in March, will be £218 a tonne because of inflation. But that's on every single piece of plastic, regardless if it's possible to get recycled content in. So it's a bit more challenging for people. So our target's slightly different. But back in 2018, when we started, average recycled content levels were about 8% in plastic packaging. They're now at about 22, 24%. So in that time, we've made a massive, massive change. And by the time we end of the pact in 25, we should be higher. We should be hitting the 30%, if not more. And we're actually looking at how do we change that to maybe be a bit more ambitious moving forward.
I want to ask Miles a question about the use of recycled content in paper packaging, since you said that paper fiber or wood fiber can be repurposed so much. And is there any analogous tax on that category of packaging?
Yeah, so in the UK, we're the largest producer of boxes. You've got boxes at home, probably 1 in 3 will be made by us. It's 100%. So it's not 30, it's 100. It's our UK facility only makes the packaging from material that's already been used. It's not chopping down new trees, anything like that. It's just collecting the refuse, bring it back, putting it around again. We use it again and again and again. And it's easy because it's fibre. It's not a different type of label or this soft plastic or a hard plastic. All we say, what we want the government to say is, just get people to put it in one container and we'll take care of everything else. We're designing recyclability from the start. We say not only with our product is 100% recyclable, we will recycle more than 100% of what we make. We guarantee it. So, although it's not, as I'm talking about our business, we don't make anything from plastic. I think the issue for businesses is to design out the complex, difficult material, and obviously not going to say, and you should come into fibre, not only because that's where I work and that's what pays my mortgage, but because it's fully sustainable and the system's there already. So 100% of the paper we make in the UK is made from recycled material. In Kent.
Torik is eager to say something, but I have a quick question, because DS Smith is, as you can clearly hear, is a leader in sustainability and has been on the front foot. By the way, there's a fantastic white paper that was just published by the company.
On recycled paper as well.
On their proposal to up recycling rates. How long have you been repurposing, so that 100% of content is recycled? How many years? Or did this just happen under your leadership?
No, this whole, I mean, I wish I could say it was, but it wasn't. I mean, the recycling of paper, because it's so easy, has been around for decades. I mean, you probably remember, I remember when I was in the Cubs when I was 10, we used to collect paper. I used to sell it. I'm sure many people remember that because it's so easy. You made papier-mâché probably when you were at home when you were younger. It's such an obvious thing too, so it's always been there. I think the difference today is about the collection systems and about how fibre-based packaging can be used to replace other sorts of packaging. So how do we replace other sorts of packaging with fibre? The system is there already, the infrastructure, a lot of it's there. We're just asking, say in the UK, which I absolutely agree with, we have a consistent way of recycling with households and come up to the sort of system that we see in many other countries across Europe, because we're the laggards. You know, we've got 74% of paper and packages recycled in the UK. The European average is over 80%, the target's 90%, and some countries are up towards 100%. You know, we've fallen behind, and we need to get back on the front foot to stop it going to landfill.
Okay, we're going to do the solutions at the end. Okay.
Sorry.
Torik. No, no, just so that we don't, because that's its whole component, another component of discussion. Torik, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I don't disagree with anything that's been said so far necessarily, but I think it is important we need to be careful when we think about the substitution of materials, and we really need to think carefully about application. What is it that we use materials for? And in some instances, there are great opportunities to use fibre-based packaging as a substitute for certain plastic-based packaging. In other instances, it just won't work. So if we think about, for example, hospitals' responses to the pandemic, paper wouldn't have done it. Plastic was really, really key. It's sterile, it's light, it's hard, it's malleable, you can mold it into different things. It's cleaner. I mean, there's an unbelievable amount of qualities in terms of what plastic can offer, and that's where I think where the real crux of the issue a lot of the time, or at least one of the big cruxes, is building in a system that means that we can have those benefits and, you know, get to a point where we can recycle more, that we are recycling more, that we can use plastics in the right way and it's in the right application. But it's just that nuance, because I think if we fibres can be great, but application and use is key, and we really need to think about what are the trade-offs involved. I don't know if you...
Just to echo that, so I agree with what Miles was saying, because fibre is a fantastic material. It depends on what you're using it for. Fibre is great for things like boxes, brilliant. How you use a cardboard box. If you're doing it for food contact stuff, fibre might not necessarily work, especially the recycled content levels, and especially when you think about the properties that are needed to, say, oxygen barriers, moisture barriers, to make sure. So if you put crisps in a paper bag, they're not going to last particularly long because they'll get soggy or wet, or they won't stay crisp effectively. So a lot of fibre alternatives will use other barrier layers, which obviously Miles is doing lots of work in his development R&D centre to look at what materials can be used to do that. But as Torik says, plastic is, I say this a lot in conversations, just click rhymes, but plastic is fantastic for a lot of different options. I don't think plastic should be used for everything, just in case people are thinking I'm a massive plastic person, I'm quite material agnostic, there's a place for different materials on there. But I always think of your HDP milk bottle. It's probably one of the most circular pieces of packaging, not just in the UK, but globally. It's been lightweighted to the inch of its life. It's got recycled content in all of it, high levels of recycled content. It's collected by every single local authority in the country. It's been redesigned now so you don't have colour pigment in the cap, which means that could be now made of recycled content, and we go back into recycled content for more bottles. So moving it to a different alternative, it doesn't necessarily always stack up. So I think it's important just to remember the context. Yes, fibre's fantastic, but it isn't the solution for just to move all plastic packaging into. They both have a place on our shelves.
Yeah, I think that was one of the big goals of Torik and Adam's remarks when we prepared for this session, was that plastic is not just, we shouldn't be banning plastic. Plastic is extremely valuable because of its lightweight and sterility. Now, we have heard about this, all the problems of the recycling regime in the UK. So, okay, I'm just going to use it as a lumps term. Don't kill me for saying that. So I want to talk about some of the solutions, and specifically extended producer responsibility. And I want Miles, obviously, to start with that. First, define it.
Yeah.
And then I think D.S. Smith is already following best practice without extended producer responsibility becoming law. I mean, it's... Or before, the UK would have been part of the EU's the mandate to implement extended producer responsibility. But obviously, it's supposed to come online soon in the UK as well. But please tell us what it is and how you guys are basically already doing it.
Yeah. So I think everybody recognises, the government included, that the amount of rubbish and waste is unsustainable. So we have to improve the system. And they have developed something, and indeed this is in common with many other countries across Europe as well, but now the UK is sort of doing it differently. This extended producer responsibility, the EPR. And basically what it's saying is if you produce packaging, you're going to have to pay to produce that packaging. You're going to have to pay a tax on that. And then that tax, the revenue that's raised, is going to be used to improve recycling rates. That's at its broadest sort of, that's in its broadest definition. So it's a producer. If you produce the packaging, you have a responsibility to make sure it's cleaned up and it's recycled. And the amount of tax that you pay will depend on the amount of material that you're using, but also the recycled content as well, and ultimately the ease of which that product is then recycled, depending which jurisdiction you're looking at. So that is sort of like a central piece of legislation that many countries across Europe have adopted. The UK have been looking to do that, but they are struggling a bit to define really how it's going to work, and their last proposals we were with, I think they withdrew them because, I mean, it's just shocking. It's just shocking. And there's a deposit return.
Deposit return scheme. Tell us about that too.
And again, there's a deposit return scheme. This is the other part of, it's basically saying it's you kind of rent the packaging. So you buy a bottle, you pay a deposit for the bottle, you take the bottle back and you get the money back. It operates in many countries across Europe. You get a plastic bottle, you basically buy the contents, you buy, if it's a water bottle, you buy the water, you pay an amount for the bottle, you finish the bottle, you take it back to the supermarket and you get your money back. It is not rocket science. They've tried it in Scotland, but that's collapsed as well, hasn't it? So for a number of reasons. Yeah. But these are all ways of providing revenue to put in place the collection system, the recycling system, so we can improve our recycling rates. But for some reason, it seems to have eluded the sort of the UK to put it in at the moment. I'm not quite sure why.
I could feel Torik jonesing to say something. Also, remember when we were preparing, you said something about imagine if every producer was responsible for the whole circular lifetime. To talk about that.
I mean, I think extended producer responsibility, I think the most important word there is responsibility. You think about responsibility, we've spoken a bit about the role of consumers, the responsibility that's placed on them. I've sort of pushed for this idea that industry should take more of responsibility, and I think that actually, I think that in a lot of instances there's a lot of interest from industry in taking responsibility, but there's political inertia. A few years ago there was a paper, I think it was published, it was Recoup, which are sort of another, and they discussed that what they had, at that point, post sort of 2018 I think, there was sort of a period of sort of excitement, I think, within the industry, and there was four key main policies that have been floating around. And in the Recoup report, they called this the policy whirlpool. And what we've ended up with is a load of policy puddles. They're not wrapped into each other at all. There's not much interaction. They're sort of murky. You don't really know what's going on. You've got a lot of conflict political conflict that goes on between devolved places. So Scotland wants to do a deposit return scheme. It's trying to be ambitious and trying to do that, and it really sort of gets kicked into the long grass from basically from Parliament and from London. And then, you know, a lot of, apart from the plastic packaging tax, apart from that, all of these policies that have been at play have been delayed. And actually, worse than that, in one instance where you look at, we had policies on consistent collections, that we would have a consistent way of collecting of goods, all the stuff we've been talking about. And just, is it October, was it before Christmas, that the Prime Minister was talking about, no, we're getting rid of the 7-bin policy.
Yeah.
Right? There was never, ever a 7-bin policy. There was a provision in the Environment Act 2021 that says, look, there's a provision in there that we will expect local authorities to collect different waste streams. But there is a provision in there that says, if it's not economically or environmentally practical, you can collect streams together, which means that you can put glass with plastics if you wanted to. You could, you can have what you've basically got now a lot of the time, which is, say, a dry mixed recycling with glass and pots, tubs, and trays and stuff like that. That got taken up and turned into this 7-bin policy. There was never going to be 7 bins across the country. It was never in there. It was written like that, but it became a political issue, which now meant they've had to rebrand it as simpler. Yeah. So then you spend all this time, you go through a rebranding exercise, and I was reading, you know, the simpler recycling sort of statement this morning on the way down. It's pretty similar to what we had. I mean, there's a few nuanced changes about actually how strict they will be with the implementation. But the key point, I think, with this is, for me, one of the biggest frustrations is just the political inertia. And I really don't think, actually, a lot of the time.
We're very supportive of EPR, and we would have to pay a huge amount of tax. But we think it works, and there are models around Europe where it does work. And we've been to the 30 or 40 different sort of ministers who've been in charge of this in the last 5 minutes, and said, but we're supportive. I mean, it's going to cost a lot of money, but you give us something else that it's going to work.
But they don't. This is the thing as well. I think is amazing the amount of industry stakeholders that I will speak to, and maybe the same with them, where there's actually a lot of interest in there being more clarity, because then businesses know that sustainability and environmentalism are important to consumers practically, but also, you know, they are important. There's an appetite for that, but the level of sort of ineptitude, and I honestly, you probably can tell how irate I'm getting, but the frustrating thing is, a lot of the time when you meet, I don't actually think they know. I mean, someone said to Rishi Sunak, it's going to be 7 bins, and he's ran with it. And I thought, it's not there. Rishi, read the act, you know? Yeah. Anyway, there we go.
Okay, let's not get too sidetracked on that. So, because now, it's such a huge topic, so I have to ask the question, okay, you guys hated the question. Miles can answer this question first. I had to ask, okay, what is the single biggest step that could actually increase recycling rates quickest? Okay, so...
all the evidence that we have across Europe and in various states in the US and indeed in the UK is to have separate collections, to have segregated household waste. That in itself, we think, would make the biggest, well, the evidence is that will make the greatest difference.
Why don't you point to the regime you actually think would be the most favorable, which would balance against what you think UK consumers would be willing to do? What do you think would be genuinely practicable?
All of our evidence, and look, you know, we're the largest recycler of fibre in the UK. We actually do all the food waste as well for Tesco and everybody else. So I think, you know, we've got a huge interest in this ourselves, and we survey the British public. There's a huge amount of support for these things. People want to feel that they're living more sustainably. And they're saying, for the household refuse, just have 1 bin for fibre, 1 bin for plastics, the myriad of plastics, 1 bin for plastics, 1 bin for glass, 1 bin for metal. And the product that you buy, when you buy it, has a colour. So if it's green, well, that means it's fibre, so I put it in the green bin. If it's blue dot, that means it's glass and it goes into glass. Now, it may sound pretty straightforward, but of course, sometimes you've got composite materials in there, but it will tell you what it is. And you just put it, by the way, this is exactly what happens in Belgium. It's exactly what happens in Germany. It's exactly what happens in many other countries. And indeed, what Wales is now implementing as well, just to go to households, but it's being kiboshed by the government. And I don't really understand why.
It's an interesting, like Torik said, it's a lot of political things with the devolved nations. As I say, we've got the devolved nations, got England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and especially with, I'm going to take England out of the equation here because it's Westminster anyway, but Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, they like being able to control what they're doing within their borders, obviously. So one of the things that they're in control of is waste management and resource management. So they want to do what they want to do in their country, and they'll do it in their own way, which is why, say, for DRS, in England, we didn't want glass in Scotland, they did, in Wales, they did, but then they didn't, nothing really worked together. It was all in like 4 different silos, so potentially on, say, a Coke bottle, you're going to have 4 labels, one for Scotland, one for England, one for Wales, one for Northern Ireland, and anyone who's a marketeer in the room, you don't want to have lots of labels meaning the same thing on your space. It's very expensive things to do. So it is mad. But say, if you look at Wales, doing it so well, and it's a brilliant little microcosm of what the UK is like. It's got some big cities, it's got ruralities, it's got affluence, it's got deprivation.
So the recycling rate for so we're 44% in the UK, in England, but it's 55% in Wales.
Yeah.
Why is it so different? Because they have different places.
I mean, I think that it's implied very heavily, and it should be self-evident that obviously Brexit had a really fatal, lethal effect on the uniform, like rendering uniform the country's recycling, because there would have been this very strong pressure towards convergence of on all
I'm not
fronts.
sure it necessarily did in terms of consistency. It certainly did in terms of movement of materials. So before I was at RAP, I used to work at a facility that sorted material, and I used to be in charge of where things went. Yeah. When we were part of Europe, it was a very straightforward piece. You had normal waste transfer notes, and then you have a piece of paper called an Annex 7, which said where it's going and all that sort of stuff.
Don't get into that.
The amount of paperwork you need now, you need a whole tome just for each vehicle that's moved. I'm glad I got out of it before Brexit hit.
By the way, you didn't answer the question.
I didn't deliberately.
Okay, so now,
this silver bullet question.
No, you resist the silver bullet answer, but try.
So just because I know what Torik's going to say, I'm going to let him say that one, just so I'm not saying exactly the same. I'm going to say the thing that will, for me, apart from the consistency side, is value. If you put a value on the material, you can guarantee it's going to get collected, it's going to get recycled. I was lucky enough, I went to India earlier in the year for work and looking at how they do things. If the material has value, they'll collect it so they can sell it and make some money. If you wrapped your food up in £10 notes, you can guarantee you're going to collect it and pick it up, won't you? So things like films and flexibles got a very low value at the moment, but things like EPR will put a bit of high value on that to encourage people to recycle it or collect it, recycle it. So short answer is value.
Okay, which requires less contamination. Okay, which will, basically result in a better quality output, which will have value. Okay, going back to the consistency point. Okay, Torik?
I should get our email exchange out, Joanne. We had an email exchange because I was trying to push me to one
answer.
One answer. If I put it in one word, I would just say it is consistency. But if you allow me to have a footnote, you don't just. It's really important that we get a consistency of collection for all of the reasons that we've discussed. But we also really need consistency in terms of the design of packaging. What materials, what polymers are allowed to be used for certain applications, and cracking down on some of the really malignant and some arguably could be quite dangerous additives that are used in a lot of packaging. So we need to be really consistent in terms of the materials that we use, and we need to embrace the fact that there's a huge amount of variety in terms of polymers that are in circulation, and we need to really start thinking about almost having some type of register, if we could ever have that meant that packaging firms only use those things, because when it comes to recyclability, you don't want to muddy the water. You want to be able to have things like milk bottles that you can put together, you know it's made of the same thing, and you can process it together. And you're not going to get some peculiar flexible thing that comes in with an odd acronym that, completely disrupts things. And really what's key there is you need, it filters through to consistent infrastructure, how it is that we actually process this stuff, the design of MRFs, those material recovery facilities. what technologies we use to separate things, making sure that's clear. I spoke to a materials recovery facility not that long ago, that they said that there was I won't say the brand, but there was a pigment change in a selection box, quite famous selection box that was...
You're not going to say the name in this closed room?
Yeah.
Seriously?
And they like to use a rich purple. There we go. And they'd slightly changed the pigment colour, and it had thrown out the optics on the machines that they use, the cameras that they use. So when they're firing these things off, it wasn't picking it up on their spectrum. So they were ending up after Christmas with a huge amount of this stuff that was in the wrong stream. And if it then goes through, then it pollutes it. So we really need consistency in terms of what we're actually putting in circulation. We need consistency with infrastructure because they marry up the two. And in order to get there, we've got to have some consistent, well-planned policy. That would be just consistency.
It's not, actually, just listening to all this, it sounds like consistency of packaging design in the plastic category sounds absolutely crucial.
I think across the board,
to
with all
yielding
packaging.
a more valuable output at the end of the waste management, the recycling process.
Well, I think because they're probably, I'm not an expert on fibres, but I think that...
He has it easy compared to you guys.
No, but I think there's more I think there's probably more diversity. Is that fair, Mark? Or in terms of what's in circulation, or...
Yeah, you said about yourself, the plastic it's a cost issue, and therefore we've had a myriad. But the consequence of that is that 95% of the plastics ever made is still with us. It's in the oceans, it's in the ground. Now that is on a global basis, but it's just that optimization. We need to make it more simple. So I'm going to agree with that. It's simple about the packaging design. You asked about regulation. You asked about the break review. That in itself isn't the biggest issue. It's the absence of direction since leaving Europe. That's the issue. You can argue whether or not we should and all the rest of it, but the fact is there's been so little. When we go to Europe, the packaging waste regulations that's just coming on. I think that's, we just need to recognise that there has been a bit of a vacuum, hasn't there?
Yeah, and that's certainly, it shows in people in waste management recyclers investment in infrastructure. It hasn't happened because there's been a vacuum of any clarity.
It's obvious also from EA Sustain that this is an across-the-board problem afflicting many different categories of society and economy. Especially, we talk about agriculture a huge amount. And, when I was talking to you guys, it seemed like this has been one of the most difficult periods because of the change of administrations and post-Brexit confusion. Okay.
It's not often an industry screams for regulation.
Two important side notes you guys wanted to absolutely make sure to cover. Please tell the audience about how biodegradable plastic is not as good as they might think. You literally have a minute for that. Please go ahead and tell them.
I'll say in a very, very short answer, yes, they can do a job. However, you can't just move things into compostables because we don't have the infrastructure in the UK to compost it. You might be able to say you put something in the food waste bin to go to a composting facility. It's the wrong type of composting. It won't compost down. You need a very specific type, and we just don't have that in the UK. So if you have, you have like a compostable cutlery, if you put that in your food waste, it's not going to break down. It needs to go to a very, very specific type of
industrial composting process, which is generally not available. Then, last thing, which I think actually this is all really, really important, the culture of recycling and how we actually, even the terminology that we use is affecting our attitude, our kind of like subconscious attitude towards how we treat packaging. So please elaborate on that, what we mean by that.
Yeah, I think when I'm making the point about value, and there's different forms of ways in which we can value goods. We can place an economic value on packaging, and I think that would be useful with like a deposit return scheme where you say it's 25p or whatever, and you take that back and you get that financial benefit back. The other way that we can think about value is the meaning that words have and the way that we label things. And we really need to start talking less about waste and more about resources, and seeing what we are producing as part of consumption as something that can be fed back into, because that's really where the circularity comes out. But we have to start thinking about the stuff that's in circulation as a resource that can be used. That can be used.
Yeah. The terminology we use, temporary custodian of a resource, rather than using instead of waste.
Yeah, waste is only
Trash.
Waste
Detritus.
has got no value.
Yes.
It has value. We put it in recycled content. Miles uses it for fibre. Use it for plastics and metals. It has a value. So I work in the waste industry. I work in resources, and it's not just about waste as well. It's about logistics. It's about technology. It's about science, chemistry, operational. It's economics. It's a huge, exciting area. So anyone who's looking for a career path, I thoroughly recommend
Come and see Adam.
There's a lot going on there. But yeah, terminology is massively key. And the custodians, but you guys aren't consumers. You're looking after the material until you give it to us to recycle.
And just quickly on that.
Quickly.
Yeah, we're already there already is value on this stuff. It already comes with a cost. One of the ways of thinking about value as well as thinking about costs. And all of this waste that is produced, if we call it waste, if it goes to incineration, that comes with a cost. It costs to incinerate stuff. There are some benefits. You might produce some heat and some electricity. It costs to landfill stuff. It costs to transport loads of plastic and export it to other countries. There's costs anyway. So the key to really thinking about it is what are the costs? What are the values? What are the benefits that can be reaped? And I think it really is important, particularly with this circularity issue. That's why I didn't like the silver bullet. The bullet question in the sense,
No cheating on the.
Because I think we need to take the circularity point really seriously, basically.
Okay. Now we are ready to take some questions from the audience. Oh gosh, so many. Okay. Oh, I also want to pick somebody who's young. Is anybody? Don't take that wrong. Is anybody a student? I heard students complaining about that. No. Okay, no students. All right, fine. Let's just. Okay, take the last person in that row just because they're sitting in the back. Okay. That backfired. That backfired badly.
Nobody noticed.
I consider myself to be quite young.
Yeah, exactly.
Student of life. You've spoken a lot about plastic and board. What about glass and batteries? Have we cracked that? Is that why you...
Adam?
So glass. Glass. Believe it or not all glass is born equally. So glass bottles, jars in your recycling bin at home, nice and simple. Lots of work's been going on around lightweighting, making sure that it's quite heavy material. Ideally, you want to be able to reuse things as well, but that's maybe a separate conversation because glass is, from a carbon perspective, is very, very high when you're trying to recycle it. You've got to melt it at very high temperatures and whatnot. Batteries. So, wow, okay. From a resource management perspective, my industry, batteries they're horrible because people never dispose of them properly and they cause an insane amount of fires. They're horrendously dangerous, especially when it comes to now the proliferation of single-use vapes is absolute nightmare because lithium batteries, if they're slightly damaged, they can expand, explode. Fires in trucks when they're collecting it or in waste management facilities. And it's a real problem. I could talk about the vapes and the issue around vapes. I know we haven't got time.
So what's the recycling regime for that?
So what you can do have batteries, there is the re-regulations, which basically means anyone who's selling batteries or products with batteries, they have to either take them back or be able to direct you to their nearest correct disposal point. So it might be that you go to the supermarket and they say, right, you can dispose of it at your local tip, effectively. With vapes, they come under the same regulations, but it's not particularly enforced because it's just, the use has exploded. 5 million single-use vapes are used in the UK every single week.
What is that? What is that term of art, that acronym you just used? What is it?
What, the vapes?
What is that?
Vapes.
Oh, vapes.
Oh,
vapes, as in smoking vapes. Sorry.
So there are 5 million single-use vapes used in the UK every single week, just to show the scale of that.
Oh, my God. Wow.
So, it is absolutely insane. And the amount of fires that they cause around the industry is massive.
It's the lithium battery.
It's the lithium battery, yeah.
Okay, next question. Okay, Pam. All right. Pam, make it quick.
Very quick. So local authorities collect waste. I think local authorities can exert influence on 30% of carbon emissions around the country through their behaviours.
Food waste.
They're procuring, transport. What contact do you have with the LGA, Local Government Agent or Association, about standardising the 200 methods of collection down to, say, 20?
Absolutely. So, I mean, we have extensive contact with with the UK government, DEFRA, etc. We don't go along on ourselves. We go along with Nestle, Coca-Cola. They're all our customers. So we all go together, and we also meet with the local government association. They do have consultations, and we go and talk to them. It's an interesting topic because I think people are kind of like overwhelmed with the issues, and they don't. And it's kind of like it's just further down the issue.
The agenda.
You know, there's just so many issues. I mean, whilst you may complain about the government and stuff, you know, you can see they're just completely overwhelmed with the issues there are. Some of them for their own making, but, you know, just the way we're living. And so you do, and everybody can kind of agree with you. It is ridiculous. But there isn't either the scope, the resource, the desire to address these sort of issues, I think, because of that reason. And the locals, I mean, you go along to the meetings, I mean, they are, you know, they have some pressing issues, which they start talking about. The last time I went to, it was all about homelessness, and it dominated everything. And we're there saying, can we talk about collection systems? And they said no.
Can I just add just quickly
there?
Is if you're a local authority, if you want to standardise, you need to know what the standard rules are so that you can all be in line with each other. So 200 or so local authorities speaking to each other is not the way. It's not the way to go. What you need national policy that says this is what we're going to be doing, so that they know the direction they can go in. And then we also know there that your private actors know where they need to invest because they know what they will have to be processing. So in Manchester, pots, tubs and trays aren't currently collected. When they are collected, you're going to have a bigger piece of infrastructure to deal with them.
Okay, last question with that lady. No, the one, yeah, because you're about to fall out of your seat.
Thank you very much. It's been an absolutely fascinating session. I've learned a huge amount, and Joanne, it's been great that you put this on your agenda. Just to the point we were talking about, interestingly, there's a thing called best in class. So if there are 200 systems in the country, it's not beyond the wit of man to evaluate those systems in terms of their recycling performance percentage and then advocate that that is the system that we would adopt nationally. Secondly, I'm really keen to hear from you, Mars, that fibre is recycled 12 times in its lifetime in terms of your extended producer responsibility. I'm keen to know if there is a similar figure that relates to plastic recycling, if you take your milk bottle, your HDPE milk bottle as an example. And finally, to your silver bullet question, I think the answer has to be we reduce consumption.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, just on that and the reduced consumption, I mean, as a company, we completely agree. And if we look at the average weight of our box today, it's 40% lower than it was 10 years ago. You know, I completely agree in designing in recyclability from the start. You know, that has to be the way. The 12 times was 10. The best we get is 25. And it all depends how you look after the fibre, because it does, ultimately, it does rot. But I think, I mean, I don't know what it is for plastic, but...
There's a couple of things on so I'll go for the order of the questions first. So the first one about recycling systems, the best in class and stuff. Unfortunately, it's not that simple because it does depend on demographics, rurality, things like that, how efficiency of collection rounds. But in theory, yes, completely. On the second point I think the second point was about how many times it can be recycled. Plastic, it depends on the polymer. It depends on the additives that have been put into it. So there are two types of mechanical recycling, you can say. There's mechanical recycling, which is the washing, shredded, melting in something new. But then there's other sorts of technology called chemical recycling, or non-mechanical recycling, depending on the terminology you want to use, which basically means you can almost recycle it infinitely, because you're breaking the plastic and the polymer down to its building blocks and rebuilding it again. So it depends on how you're doing it and the polymer you're doing. But it can vary widely from mechanical recycling. It might be recycled 7 times, it could be at 12 times, it could be more, it completely varies. And apologies, I think I forgot the third question.
No, anyway, because we got to wrap it now. By the way, this is an incredibly fascinating subject. I want to thank all the speakers. I want to just also end on a bright note and summarize just really quickly. I think this is one of those rare areas where progress is being made by business in what should be a national top-down process, but actually business is actually prodding the government to be more aggressive. So that's great. And also, really quickly about the plastic recycling, the coming online of technologies which can handle chemical recycling is actually a very important bright spot, which is going to enable increased plastic become really truly circular. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.